Should you pitch your no-code app idea before you're ready to actually bring users on board? This is a really great question. And what I mean by it is, should you be having conversations with potential beta users, potential test users about coming on board and using your app before the app is actually ready? So before you can technically bring them on board. This is a question we get from a lot of our clients. And again, it's a really great one to ask because you want to make sure you have the right plan and strategy in place for rolling out your app and having a seamless transition from being in development to being in live mode where you're now bringing users onto your app and they're interacting with it on a test basis, on a beta basis, that kind of thing. So again, really great question. And that's what we're going to break down today. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because we're also going to talk about some of the next steps that you need to be aware of as well. So once you get the answer to this, once you put this into motion for yourself, what do you need to be aware of next? It's equally important. So make sure you stick around for that. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. So let's dive in and answer this question. I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to jump over to the whiteboard. So should you pitch your app before you launch? Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about pitching your app to investors or to your backers or something like that. I'm more so talking about whether or not you should be doing beta outreach or user outreach before your app is actually ready. So you can consider it in the same sort of realm as pitching your app as well, but they're kind of different scenarios. So we're really just talking about starting to talk about bringing beta users on board with those potential beta users before your app is actually ready. Now, I was having a conversation with a client the other day who had come up against this question, and for good reason too. He had a strategy and a plan in place for kind of rolling out his app or going from development to now being launched and live and having beta users on board. But a couple things sort of happened. So first, when COVID hit, and this has affected lots of entrepreneurs, obviously, and many app founders just like him, but a lot of the businesses in his industry that his app targets, they were shut down. And so the first problem here was that his potential users couldn't technically start using the app quite yet anyways. But then beyond that, he wasn't quite ready with his first version yet, and he was considering still doing some outreach, and he just wasn't really sure how to move forward or if he should move forward yet. Now, you might have found yourself wondering some of these same things or feeling some of these same things. And trust me, you're not alone. Neither was the client that I'm referring to. Many people have these same thoughts as well. And usually they are related to a few different things, or this hesitation is related to a few different things. The first is sort of the fear that a potential user is going to lose interest in your app before you are actually ready. So you have a conversation with them, you do your outreach, and then maybe you are finally ready to bring them on board a month or 2 months later, or maybe even 3 months later. And what if they're not interested anymore? Time has passed, right? And people also tend to kind of worry that not just that the user or the potential user will lose interest, but that they'll actually forget about that pitch or that outreach. They'll forget about you, they'll forget about your app, they'll just forget about it because let's be honest, attention spans are fairly small these days. Everyone has other things going on in their lives. And so while you might be top of mind for them, your app might be top of mind for them during the conversation you're having with them, what about a month from now? Will they just forget altogether? And then another common hesitation, and really this one is more so a worry, is If you start having conversations with these potential users and you're generating interest and you're maybe even committing them to becoming your first users, your test users, your beta users, if you tell them, I'm going to be ready in a month, in 2 months to bring you on board, what if you're not ready? What if you don't finish this first version of your product and then this date comes and you're not ready to bring them on board? Won't you be letting those potential users down? Will that reflect poorly on you? This is a really common fear that people have when they think about doing this outreach before their product is ready. And it's totally understandable. But in following our own methodology, we always coach on starting your outreach prior to having your app ready for users to come on board. Okay, so always just go ahead and do your outreach. Start right now, even if your app isn't going to be ready for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Start now. Okay, and there are a few main reasons for this. And we're going to talk through these in depth so that you can really understand how and why you should be moving forward in a certain way. So the first reason why you really want to start having these conversations is because it gives you excellent feedback. Okay. It gives you really good feedback when you start talking to people about becoming your first test users, because you get to learn exactly why they do want to be test users, beta users, or maybe why they don't want to be your test users. We have an entire tracking system we use just for beta outreach. It just tracks the actual outreach steps you take throughout the process, because doing the outreach alone, whether you end up having lots of beta users to bring on board on the other side or not, just doing the outreach alone gives you feedback that is so invaluable that you should be not only doing it, but you should be tracking it, and you should be seeing what works, what doesn't, how to optimize, how to refine, how to talk about your app more effectively, how to change ways that you're conveying your app, how to understand how other people are perceiving your words. I mean, you can get so much information just by having conversations. This is one of the main reasons why we start doing this outreach early on. Now, the next reason is because, and this one is pretty obvious, but it generates interest. It generates interest in your app, right? The reality is nobody, most likely nobody, is going to be talking about your app before you actually start bringing users on board. Unless you have a small team, or maybe you have some marketing funding or something like that, it's very likely that nobody's going to be talking about your app. You have to talk about it. You have to be the one to talk about it and to start doing this outreach to your prospective users, because otherwise they will never know about your app. All right. So there's no reason not to start generating this early interest, because all it does is help you. You're being the spokesperson for your app, as you should be. And that's a really good thing. You want to start generating this interest so that when you are ready, you can have this more seamless transition into bringing those users on board. When we first launched our Built to Scale program, for example, and this is our private program where we're working with entrepreneurs, we launched, we did our outreach before we launched, and we had people waiting about 6 weeks before they actually came on board. Okay, so we started doing the outreach before actually bringing them on board. And that was fine. That wasn't a problem. That was a really good thing, because we didn't have to launch and do our outreach at the same time and spread our bandwidth too thin. But one of the really important things that we learned, and that you will learn as well, is that when you first talk to someone about coming on board your app or using your product, using your service, whatever it is, when you first have that conversation, only a very small percentage is going to take you up on that. a really small percentage is going to move forward and actually come on board your app or commit to being your beta user. Most people will come back later. They'll come back 6 to 12 months later, and then they'll want to come on board. That's just the way it works. No matter what type of product or service you're creating and offering, most people aren't going to, pull the trigger right then and come on board. They're going to come back later. And that's something that we have seen time and time again. It's totally normal. Not everybody is ready right now, but that doesn't mean that they're not keeping you and your app in mind for when they are ready. So if you start talking about your app now and you start generating interest in your app now, even for the people who aren't going to come on as those beta users, it's still going to be setting you up for more success down the road. It's so important. So start generating early interest. Now, the other big reason why we like to do this is because of the accountability, right? There is nothing like telling your beta users or your potential users, or there's nothing like telling them that you're going to have your app ready for them on a certain date to light the fire under you and to get that app ready. Okay, just by having these conversations with these users, you will automatically be moving forward more quickly, more efficiently with your app. It's sort of inevitable, right? Because you don't want to let them down. If you're an entrepreneur and you're releasing a product, chances are you really care about the people who you'll be serving, the people who you'll be helping. And therefore, you don't want to let them down. And so if you tell them you're going to do something, then you're going to do it. And this is really important because if nobody knows about your app, if you're not talking about your app, if you don't have any firm deadlines, if you don't have any external accountability, it's really easy to keep building and building and building and tweaking and optimizing and changing before you've ever brought anyone on board. And this can go on for months. It can go on for years. But if you just start talking about your app and you start generating this interest and planning for these first users to come on board, you have this external accountability that is so incredibly powerful. It's going to help you move forward more quickly with your app, and it's going to help you build earlier traction, which is it's really valuable in those early stages with your app. So when you have these three things, you have the feedback, you have the early interest, you have the accountability, they kind of combine to help you in a number of different ways. So with your feedback and your accountability, right? When you're having these conversations with people and you're actually hearing the words they're saying in response to you talking about your app, and you're telling them, I'm going to have this app ready for you to come on board in a month or in 2 months. Well, when you have those two things combined, this keeps you laser focused on priorities, on the things that you have to do in order to bring them on board. It keeps you from falling victim to scope creep. It keeps you from running down the wrong path that's not going to help enable them coming on board. So it just keeps you focused. And if you have that entrepreneurial mindset where you have tons and tons of ideas all at once constantly, then you know how valuable this is. You know how important it is. Now, when you have that early interest, you're generating that early interest and you have the accountability, there is nothing like these two things that will light the fire better, right? I mentioned this earlier. This really just kind of lights the fire. You have people who are interested in your app. You have this external accountability because now you're telling people that you're going to be onboarding them onto your app. That is going to drive you forward like nothing else will. It's really valuable, really important for you. And then when you have that early interest being generated, you have people who are wanting to come on board your app, and you have the feedback that you're getting. Well, this is really just extra validation, right? It's validation that you are on the right path, that you're headed down the right direction. And when you have all those things, you find this sweet spot in the middle that's just going to, again, help you build quick and early traction with your app. And that's one of the things we really focus on, quick and early traction. So start talking about your app, start having these conversations with your target market, with your prospective users, with that first batch of beta users that you want to come on board, because it's only going to benefit you in the immediate and in the long run. It can feel intimidating to talk to people when you don't have the app ready, but there are so many benefits to it. You know, you can think of platforms like Kickstarter, for example. You know, on Kickstarter, people come on and they launch their prototypes. They don't have the actual product completely ready, but you know, they start essentially just talking about it, but on a platform, and people come on and back them. And it does these three things that we're talking about. It shows them that there's early interest. It gets them feedback on what they're doing, and it provides massive external accountability for them, right? So this is not a new thing. This is a thing that is totally normal, and that can really help you in the long run. The thing to really remember is that there will always be people in need of the solutions to their problems. Okay, there are always going to be people in need of solutions. And most of those problems that people are looking to solve, they're not fleeting problems, right? I mean, that means they are not just, you know, short-term temporary if you're building an app to solve them. So if they need your app now, right? So if you're having a conversation with them about coming on board as a beta user, for example, but they need your app right now. So you might be worried that, well, if you have to tell them that they can't come on board for another month or two or something like that, maybe they'll be upset or you'll be letting them down, right? Well, if they need your app right now because they have this problem right now, they're going to have the problem a month from now. They're going to have the problem 2 months from now, 3 months from now. But when you start having the conversations, then when the solution is ready, you will be top of mind for them. You will be the one that they turn to because you've already had the conversation. You've made the connection. You've already started the process of bringing them on board your app, even if it's with something as small as a conversation. So really, really important. Now, when you've done this outreach, when you've had these conversations, when you have said, okay, I have X number of beta users, they're going to be coming on board my app 1 month from now. What do you do then? Okay, so you have the conversations. Well, this is just as important. And there are a couple things that people tend to overlook. So you'll see some people, maybe they will run an ad on Facebook and they'll say, hey, sign up to be my beta user. So when I launch, you can be the first one in the door. And maybe they'll launch 3 months later, but they find that they don't have a really good conversion rate. In other words, the people who clicked on their ad, who they paid money to have them come and opt into their email list, a few months later when they're ready, none of them come on board. And that can lead people to think, well, maybe I shouldn't have reached out so early. But more often than not, the problem is that there's no communication in between the time when you have this conversation or you do the outreach, whatever type of outreach you're doing, and when you're actually bringing them on board. It's like complete silence during that time, and that's a problem. The problem isn't talking about your app early. The problem is just letting the silence happen in between when you're actually ready. So when you've done the outreach and you've had the conversations, which is what I keep saying, but you can be doing outreach in lots of ways, right? You can be posting things on social media groups. You can be messaging people, whatever you're doing, right? The important thing you need to remember is to get contact information. Make sure when you're having these conversations or doing this outreach that you're getting the contact information, right? And that these people know that you're going to be contacting them. So let's just use the easy example of, you know, you have an opt-in form and they're putting their email address in that, okay? Or maybe you're talking to them on the phone and they're giving you their email address. You have to make sure that you're getting this information. And this can seem pretty obvious, but oftentimes it's not, because you're excited about having these conversations. You're telling people about your app. It's not ready yet. So you're kind of like, well, you know, I'll get back in touch with you, right? Get their contact information and decide on the way in which you are going to contact all of these beta users. Is it by phone? Is it by email? how are you going to contact them? This is one of the reasons why we have a tracking system set up, because you can see what the easiest or what the most effective way of contact is, and then you can move forward with that. But make sure you get the contact information, and make sure that you communicate with them. Okay. When you do the outreach, when you have a conversation and someone is expressing interest, they're giving you good feedback, they want to be one of your early users, but you're not going to be ready yet. So you collect their email address. Well, during the time in which you are completing version 1 and preparing to be able to onboard these users, communicate with them, stay in touch with them, stay top of mind, make sure they remember you. It's a really easy way to completely combat those initial hesitations or fears that people are going to forget about you, that, it's going to be too late, or whatever you're thinking. All you have to do is communicate with them, right? So you get their email address. Well, next week, or maybe 2 weeks from now, you email them with a really exciting update about how the app is progressing and how it's going to help them. Maybe you're working on a feature that is really integral in solving the problem that they're experiencing. And so you talk about that. You talk about how important it is to solve that problem, and how you're working so hard on effectively solving that problem. Maybe a couple weeks later, you are preparing the onboarding. And so you reach out and you say, hey, we're getting close to bringing you on board. We're going to solve these problems, and, that kind of thing. Get them excited. Keep talking to them. Stay in touch with them. Build a connection. And then once you get to the point of being able to onboard them, you're going to be able to. Okay, because they're going to remember who you are. They're going to not only have early interest in your app, but they're going to have continued interest in your app. And because you have put some external accountability in place, you're going to be ready to onboard them. And you're really just setting yourself up for that immediate success, that early traction, and that continued momentum from there on out. So, should you be doing outreach to your first users, to your beta users, before your product is ready? Yes, for all of these reasons. Generate that interest, right? Get that feedback, get that accountability in place, but then make sure you follow through with it. Make sure that you continue to take action after that, so that you can keep the interest high, and so you can seamlessly move from development into actually onboarding these users and now kicking off the app with tons of already built up momentum. So I hope that's helpful for you. If you've had the same questions, then, keep all of this in mind as you move forward. Now, if you are starting out with your app, if you're in those early stages where you're thinking about some of these things because you haven't launched yet, well, we have a free 75-minute training that talks you through some different strategies that we like to use when planning out an app, scoping an app, developing an app. We talk about some of the different tech tools, some tools in the no-code space. And so if you're getting started with your app, or if you have started but you want to make sure you're headed in the right direction, it's a great training to join in on. It's completely free. You can head to that at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop and join in there. All right, again, I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.